Well, hello friends. Welcome to video number 3 in our series on what I would do if I was starting a writing career in 2025. This is going to be about writing habits, but we're going to spend most of the video talking about my favorite subject in the entire world, which is flow. Second favorite subject in the entire world, but that is flow. So we're going to just really jump right into this. I think that everybody understands at a base level how important a writing habit is. So let's just get into the meat of it, right? All right. So in order to start this subject properly, we have to have some definitions. Okay. What is flow? Flow is very simply optimal experience. So an optimal experience is when everything aligns and your brain is 100% engaged in whatever it is you're doing. Some of the sort of things that you see during this state are time either stretches, so every moment feels like a really long time, or, and this is more often, it collapses. It shrinks. So that you'll start doing something, you'll look up and hours have gone by, right? And flow is just that state of optimal experience where everything is really tuned in. Your whole mind and your body are just completely tuned in to what it is you're doing. And if you've ever played a video game and you've just gotten lost in the video game, you've experienced flow. If you've ever, put on a song and started listening to the music and all of a sudden it's over, you've experienced flow. If you've ever started working on something or maybe started reading a book, and suddenly you look up and hours have gone by, you've experienced flow. If you've ever been engaged in an activity and all of a sudden your stomach growls because it's been like 9 hours since you ate anything, you are in a state of flow. Okay, so flow is just this descriptor for optimal experience. And you can have flow in almost everything you do in life, right? You can do everything, whether it's walking or talking or, physical activity or mental activity. You can do all of it in a flow state. And your life is better if you do it in a flow state because of the chemicals it produces in your brain, and because flow is just intrinsically satisfying. Okay? And the reason flow is intrinsically satisfying is because reward is actually one of the pieces that is required for flow. So, flow is optimal experience. There are 3 things that we need in order to achieve flow. Okay? The first is clarity. So we need clarity. We need to understand what it is we're trying to do. If somebody just puts you in a room and there's a bunch of random stuff on the table and they say, do the task, and then they walk out, it is impossible to get into flow because you have no idea what the task is. But on the other hand, if somebody comes into the room, puts a bunch of random stuff on the table and says, all of the stuff on the table can combine to form a specific shape. Do the task. It'll be a lot easier to get into flow because you know exactly what your task is. You have to combine all of the things in the room to create the specific shape, right? So clarity is important. It's required, right? The second thing that's required is challenge. So if you walked into the room and there were 2 objects in the room, and one was half of a circle and the other was the other half of a circle, and they said your objective is to form a circle with these 2 objects, go. It would be impossible to get into flow because even though you have clarity of goal, it's so easy to simply put the 2 objects together and create the circle that there's no flow, right? you can't get into flow because there's no challenge to it. It's just really easy, right? So your brain is going to be thinking about other things that you're going to be like, why did they want me to do this in the first place? You're going to be thinking about all of these other things while you're doing the task because it's so simple, right? So it requires challenge. Now, if they came in, put you in the room, you have 3,000 objects, and they said, these objects form a very specific shape. Go. You also would not be able to get into flow because the challenge is too difficult, right? But flow exists somewhere between 2 and 3,000 objects, right? There's some amount of objects where it is challenging enough, and it might be 10, it might be 100, it might be 1,000. I don't know. It depends on you. But there is a point in that spectrum where there are enough objects that it is a challenge, but not so many that it is impossible, right? And flow exists in that state. And then the third thing that we need, that is required for flow, is reward. There has to be a reason for you to do it. There has to be a motivating factor, right? And the motivating factor can be intrinsic, it can be extrinsic, right? It can be internal, it can be external. Doesn't matter. You just have to have a reward for doing what you're doing. So let's say they put you in the room and they say, okay, here are some objects, right? 15 objects. They combine into a very specific shape. We can see what the shape is. We're trying to make a star, right? And these 15 objects will combine into a star. Make the best star you can, and the person who makes the best star wins, right? So I have clarity of goal. There's challenge. 15 objects is starting to get up there, but I can do it. If they also come in and say, okay, you will get absolutely nothing for doing this, then if I'm not a person who's intrinsically motivated to problem solve or to solve puzzles, I'm not going to be able to get into flow because it's like, why? What's the point, right? Why bother with this? But if they said that if I achieve the objective, right, if you actually do this, if you manage to make the star, we'll give you $10,000, I would be highly motivated to do it. And it would be very easy in those circumstances to get into flow, right? Because I have clarity of goal. I have a challenge in front of me that is achievable, but requires my brain. And I have reward, right? There is something motivating me to do this. Okay, so let's put this example aside, right? We've used it to illustrate what flow is and how flow is achieved. Let's talk about it with writing and discuss how we can get into flow with our writing. So, first of all, what do we want? We want clarity. Okay, what is clarity? Well, if I sit down in front of my computer and say, I'm going to write a book, that is not super clear. But if I sit down in front of my computer and say, I'm going to write this scene from this chapter in this book, that's clarity. Which means that when we're building our writing habit, the first thing we want to do every single time we sit down is we want to have an idea of what we're writing. We want to know what it is that we're actually trying to accomplish. Maybe when we sit down, we say, you know what, I'm editing today. I am going to edit these 3 chapters. Or when we sit down, we might say, I'm going to write as much as I can in this chapter. Or you might say, I'm going to write 2 chapters or 5 chapters or, whatever. You might have a word count goal. I'm going to get to 1,500 words or 2,000 words or 3,000 words. Regardless of what you decide, the clearer the goal, the more clarity you have, the better. Okay? So this is why so many authors just sort of naturally gravitate towards word counts. Because if I say, I'm going to write this scene, the scene could be 500 words long, it could be 15,000 words long, right? There's a huge discrepancy in what it could be. I don't know what it is yet because I haven't written it. But if instead I say, I'm going to write 1,500 words, that's very clear. Because when I get to 1,500, I stop. Right? I'm going to write 1,500 words. But there's still some ambiguity there. Because am I going to write 1,500 words in in 10 minutes? Am I going to write it in 20 minutes? Or am I going to write it in 2 hours or 3 hours? And this is why, again, a lot of writers naturally gravitate towards setting a sprint limit, right? So I like 30-minute sprints, and I know I can write 1,500 words in 30 minutes if I'm concentrated. And so I can say, okay, absolute clarity, I'm going to write 1,500 words in 30 minutes. And this is what I'm going to write. I have plot points that are going to tell me this is approximately what's going to happen, right? And so with those two things in mind, all of a sudden, I have clarity. It doesn't matter what the overall story is. It doesn't matter, all of this other extraneous stuff that surrounds my novel. None of that really matters because I have one goal right now, which is in 30 minutes to write 1,500 words about these specific things. Okay? Simple. Not always easy, but simple. So that first thing, that clarity, we have an idea of what we're writing, 1,500 words in 30 minutes for me, and about these plot points. Cool. So my clarity is good. What about challenge? This is a trickier one, right? How do we introduce challenge into our writing? So there are a couple of things that you can do, and this is a lot more personal, right? I could look at your writing habit, and I could very clearly articulate for you what a good goal would be in terms of, clarifying what your goal is, right? Okay, you're on chapter 4. You've just finished chapter 4. Cool. What happens at the beginning of chapter 5? Those are your plot points. How long are you going to write for? 3 hours. Cool. Split that up into 30-minute chunks or 20-minute chunks and start writing. Write 1,000 words every 30 minutes or every 20 minutes or 30 minutes, whatever you're deciding on. Write that much. Right? It doesn't matter who you are. I can identify that. If you're writing by hand, I can say, okay, you typically will write 300 words in a half an hour sprint. Great. Write 300 words by hand, and these are your plot points, right? Again, the clarity piece, anybody can identify. This second piece, challenge, is a little bit harder because it has to do with your skill level in writing. When I started out, I couldn't write 1,500 words in half an hour, right? I couldn't even write 500 words in half an hour. I could write maybe a couple hundred, 200 words, 250, 300 if I was like really cruising. Over time, though, that ability grew. I got better and better at writing. I started to understand conventions. I started to understand my own voice and my own rhythms. And so I got faster and faster and faster until I was writing, 700 to 900 words every half an hour. And then when I started dictating, that number dropped, right? I was able to dictate 500 words in an hour, or in a half an hour, I mean. And you sort of scratch your head and you go, well, why dictate then? Well, it's because the upper limit of the skill is a lot higher. And so now I can do 1,500 words, sometimes 17, 18, 1,900 words when I'm dictating. And so when I'm setting my goal, I have to keep that in mind, because if I set the goal of I need to do 250 words in the next half an hour, I would not be able to get into flow. It would be utterly impossible because the level of challenge isn't high enough for me, right? This is one of the reasons that at a certain point during my dictation, I had to add music into my dictation process. So I'm listening to music as I'm dictating, because otherwise it's too easy. And I need the extra little bit of challenge of listening to something while I'm also trying to speak in order to make the process work. I know some people who, when they dictate, they like to add a challenge with their hands. And so they'll play a video game, right? They'll play something that's fairly mindless, a racing game or something where they're just running around, jumping or moving or doing all of these different things. And they'll do that because they can do that sort of on autopilot, and it adds a layer of difficulty to their dictation. Does that make sense? So when we're optimizing for challenge, we have to understand where we are, right? And so what we want to do is we want to pick something that is not so easy we can think about other things while we do it. We want to pick a goal that's hard enough that it requires our full attention. And this is going to take some figuring out for you, like to figure out specifically. But for me, right, I'm going to do 1,500 words in 30 minutes. I have my plot points. I'm going to listen to music in order to increase just a little bit of difficulty into what I'm doing. I know that this seems counterintuitive, but believe me when I say this really works. For some people, listening to music isn't going to be quite enough. What they need is actually to go and sit somewhere where there's a lot of visual activity. And so their eyes can track the visual activity while they're still dictating their story, right? Because again, it's about making things just hard enough that there's challenge to it. And so it keeps your full attention, right? If you're finding yourself as you're writing just constantly distracted by things, you need to increase the level of difficulty. But then there's a second way that we increase the level of difficulty, which is we write harder things. Like we write better. We write harder tropes. We write harder scenes. We focus on adding emotion and we focus on different kinds of writing tricks or different styles in order to challenge ourselves, to make it harder, right? What if I write a character who can't walk? How do I write an action story with a character who can't walk, right? How do I introduce challenge into my character's life that I don't just know immediately how to get rid of, right? How do I back myself into a corner in the story and then puzzle my way out of it, right? All of these things add difficulty. How do I improve my dialogue and make it snappy? And so one of the best ways to increase the challenge of your writing is to focus on a specific craft problem. Maybe in your stories, the main character gets out of trouble too easily, right? Okay, cool. So once you've identified that, now every time you sit down to write, constantly be thinking to yourself, how do I make it so that my main character doesn't get out, like is not such a Mary Sue, right? Doesn't just get out of trouble immediately. And you can do that with any kind of craft improvement in your writing. And use it as a lever to increase the challenge that you face in your writing. Okay, so we've got clarity and we've got challenge. Before we go any further, I think it's really important to understand how the third piece of flow interacts with our writing habit, and that's reward, right? So instead of thinking about reward as like the thing you get, you should think about reward as what will make you feel a sense of achievement. So rather than picking a thing, so for instance, I have this really fun Lego figure from D&D, and I might say that every time I finish a book, I'm going to get a new character, one of those new Lego characters, right? Because I think they're so cool. I love them. And while that's a cool reward, that's not the kind of reward that we're talking about when we're talking about flow. So instead, what I want to be doing is I want to be thinking to myself, what is it that's going to give me a sense of achievement on a daily basis, right? What is it that after I finish writing, I'm going to feel really good about writing, okay? And in that case, what you actually want is a very clear benchmark for success and failure. And so for me, I really like to use word counts, right? I like to use total word counts. Some people like to use total scenes. Some people like to use total chapters. I like to use total word counts because it's so exact and it's so immediate, right? Immediate feedback is a tremendous boon here. So this has to do with motivation. This is the reason you are doing the thing you are doing. And this is, again, going to be intensely personal. Some people are writing because they want to prove something to other people. Some people are writing because they want to prove something to themselves. Some people are writing because they're very mercenary and they want lots of money. They want to be able to sit on the couch and do nothing. Some people are writing, like me, so they have more time to read. And because there are stories in their head that just won't go away. So depending on why you're writing, you're going to want to tune the reward for writing to what actually interests you, right? If you are not motivated by money at all, then setting a dollar goal or buying yourself something after you've completed a manuscript or completed your writing is just not going to motivate you, right? If you're the kind of person who is really, really motivated by public praise, like you want to write a #1 bestseller because that's going to make you feel really good about yourself, then it's going to be important that you keep that in mind as you write. You know, why am I doing this thing? Well, it's so that I can write a fantastic book and I can put it out and, you know, be a #1 bestseller. But it's also important to understand that there are good motivations and there are bad motivations. And being motivated by money, being motivated by accolades, they're really not very good. And they're not good because they have no longevity. So we did a video on longevity. Hopefully you got some value out of it. But it's important to understand that if you have a dollar amount that is your goal, like, okay, I need to make $100,000. And if I could make $100,000 every year from my writing, I would be golden. I hate to break it to you, but when you hit 100K, you will not be golden. In fact, you're just going to feel kind of defeated. This is the weirdest thing about goals. But when we set our motivations based on goals that have no real value in the grand scheme of things, or have no longevity to them, then once we hit that goal, there's nothing else, right? So like you might say, okay, Seth, I want to make $1 million off of my writing. Okay, cool. And then what? Are you going to stop writing? Are you going to quit because you've hit $1 million? And if you keep going, then that means making $1 million wasn't actually your goal. But if you quit, is $1 million really going to be enough? And so understanding that the reward we pick for ourselves, our motivation to continue going, is only as good as the number of times that we can achieve it. So saying I would like to make $1 million a year is a better goal than saying I want to make $1 million, because it requires you to do it over and over and over again. I still don't think money is a great goal, just because you never have enough. But if instead I was to say, okay, I want to write 5 books a year. Now that's a goal that has some legs to it, because I can do that every year, right? I can write 5 books every year, and the clock starts ticking from day 1, January 1st. I've got to get a book out because I have 4 more books to get out after that, right? And when I get to the end and I've written my 5th book, if I wrote my 5th book, in December, then great, I've used my whole year. The problem is, what if I write my 5th book in September? What do I do for the rest of that year? Whether you tell yourself, oh, I could do 6, I could do 7, you're going to find your motivation sort of flagging because your goal was to write 5 books. So in the first video that I did in this series, we talked about goal setting, right? And we talked about how there are 2 kinds of goals. There are destinations and there are benchmarks. And while we need to keep the destination in mind, what we should really be focusing on is the benchmarks. And I think as long as we can focus on the benchmarks, we can really use that to our advantage in establishing flow in our writing habit. You know, when I'm focused on just the destination, right? Writing 5 books in a year. Man, my writing's awful. It's a good thing I don't have to write by hand. If 5 books is my goal, then when I hit it, my motivation just kind of dies. But if instead my goal is, instead of writing 5 books in a year, that being my goal, if that's my destination and my benchmark is to write 1,000 words every day, then my motivation every single time I sit down to write is just going to be 1,000 words, 1,000 words, 1,000 words, 1,000 words. And if I write 1,000 words every day, there's a reasonable chance that I'll make it to those 5 books, right? So understanding how setting your reward helps keep you motivated on a day-to-day basis is super important for your writing habit. So what I want you to do is I want you to take the goals that you did in the first video, right? Paying attention to the costs that you assigned in the second video, the longevity video. And I want you to pick a goal, a daily writing goal that is both achievable, right? It doesn't cost too much. And it's something that you can do over the long term and is a good benchmark for getting you where you want to go. So for me, this year, it's 15,000 words every day. Okay? Now let's make sure though that this is actually fitting the criteria that I've given you, right? Is 15,000 words achievable? Well, as we talked about in our previous video, 15,000 words takes about 5 hours of concentrated work. Okay? Do I have 5 hours every day that I can put towards this work? I do. Is it something that's going to drain all my energy and I'm not going to be able to achieve it because I get too tired? No, I have enough energy to do 5 hours of concentrated work. Is it going to prevent me from being able to do all of the other stuff in my life that I need to do to, take care of my relationships, to engage with fans, to do all of the other like social media, marketing, all of that stuff as well? No, I can do all of that in 3 hours or 4 hours during the day, and then I can write for 5. Okay. So if that's the case, then 15,000 words a day is a great goal. Now, again, that's for my circumstances. For your circumstances, that's going to be a little bit different. But instead of setting a destination goal and trying to use that to motivate myself, instead we want to set a benchmark goal, because that's going to allow us to have something that we can do over and over and over again. And we've already checked to make sure that it is not only achievable, but it is something we can do long term. Okay? So, I know this has been long, but that is a breakdown of how we optimize for flow when building our writing habit. Hopefully this video was helpful for you. If it was, give the video a like, please subscribe, and leave me a comment down below letting me know what sort of writing habit you're going to be building. Answer these 3 questions, okay? Break down for me how you're going to get clarity, how you're going to make sure your challenge is an appropriate level for you, and what sort of goal you're going to be setting to give yourself that sense of achievement when you succeed.